The long gallery at Marlhurst was lit by 400 candles on a Thursday evening in October, and Lady Esmeralda Thornvale stood at the far window with her champagne glass and her back to the room, watching the frost form on the dark glass outside. She had accepted her cousin's invitation, knowing he would be here. She had dressed in aubergine silk, knowing he would be here. She had practiced, in the carriage from Bath, the precise expression she would wear if he crossed the room to her. Not cold, not warm, simply present, the face of a woman who had survived and built and translated 3 volumes of Petrarch, and buried a good husband, and did not require anything from this room or from him. She had practiced it for 11 miles of autumn road, and when she heard his footsteps on the parquet behind her and felt the particular stillness that entered a room, when Tristan Halverton, Duke of Merworth, stopped moving. Every rehearsed line of that expression dissolved. She set her glass on the windowsill. She turned. 12 years. He was 40 now, and it showed in the way men of his rank showed age, not diminished, but reduced to something more essential. The softness of 28 was gone. He had the look of a man who had watched someone die slowly and had not looked away. She had heard he attended the ball only because his sister insisted. She had heard his daughters had asked whether Papa would dance again. She did not know, looking at him now, whether grief or guilt had carved the lines beside his mouth. And she found, to her own considerable annoyance, that the distinction mattered to her. "Esmeralda," he said. "Tristan," she said. The silence between them lasted long enough for a woman 3 feet away to stop pretending to examine the portrait above the fireplace. Tristan looked at her, at the gray threading her dark hair at the temples, at the sharpness that had replaced the softness in her jaw, at the fact that she did not look away from him and did not intend to. "You used to be beautiful," he said. Esmeralda reached for her glass. She set it down again, deliberately, on the sill beside her. And she looked at him full on, and she said, "And you used to be kind. We both changed." 4 seconds of silence. A woman nearby gave an audible intake of breath, not quite a gasp, but close enough that 2 people turned to look at her. Tristan could not answer. His mouth opened and nothing came. Esmeralda held his gaze for 3 seconds longer, then she turned, walked back into the dancing, and did not look behind her. He stood at the window alone for 11 minutes. The champagne glass she had left on the sill caught the candlelight and held it. Rosamond found him there. His sister had been watching from the moment he crossed the room, because Rosamond had spent 3 years watching, quietly, carefully, in ways she had not yet told him. And she took his arm without speaking and walked him out of the gallery. A servant removed Esmeralda's glass 20 minutes later. Tristan, by then, was in the cold of the courtyard, with his coat open and his breath clouding in the October air. But he saw it carried away, and he stood a moment longer before he followed his sister to the carriage. 12 years earlier, in October, the ring had been returned in her father's study at Pendlewick House. Esmeralda had placed it on the desk herself. She had not thrown it, had not wept, had not raised her voice, because she was 24, and she already understood that a woman who lost her composure in a scene like this one would be remembered for the scene and not for the injury. Tristan had stood at the door of the study for what felt like a very long time. He had said her name once, just once, in a voice she had never heard from him before or since. The voice of a man who understands, in the moment of the thing, that he is doing something he cannot undo. She had kept her back to him. She had heard the door close. The letter arrived the following week. She had known the instant she saw his handwriting on the envelope, what it was. A man who had broken their engagement to marry a woman with a larger fortune would not write to apologize. He would write to explain. And an explanation, at that age and in that situation, was a particular kind of cruelty. The cruelty of a man who wanted her understanding more than he wanted her happiness. She returned it, unopened. She did not keep a copy of the refusal note. She did not want anything in her possession that connected her to the question of what he had written. Then 12 years passed. They passed the way years do when a person is too busy surviving to track their passage. In seasons and small decisions, and the accumulated weight of daily life becoming something that resembled, eventually, a self. Esmeralda married Baron Thornvale in the spring, following the broken engagement. He was 51, a widower, a man of moderate estate and immoderate kindness, and he had asked her with the directness of a man who understood exactly what she was and did not expect her to pretend otherwise. She had not loved him at the beginning. She had come to love him, steadily, gratefully, in the way one comes to love a house that turns out to be warmer than it looks from the road. He died of a fever in her 7th year of marriage. She was 31. She buried him in May, and by September she had moved to the dower house outside Bath. And by the following spring she had published her first translation under her own name and begun the Thursday Salon that would become, over the next 5 years, the most quietly influential literary gathering in the west of England. Tristan married Honora Caulfield 6 weeks after the broken engagement. The county called it duty. The county was not wrong. Honora's dowry had saved the Mereworth estates from a debt that had been quietly accumulating for a decade. And Tristan had known, when he broke the engagement, exactly what he was choosing and why. What the county did not know was what 11 years of marriage to Honora had done to him. She was not unhappy. She was not warm in the way Esmeralda was warm. She was careful, precise. A woman who managed a household and a reputation with the same meticulous attention she gave to everything she touched. She had given him 2 daughters, Beatrix and Cecily, and she had given him 11 years of a life that was, by every external measure, a successful marriage. What it had given him internally was more complicated and more honest and more costly than he had expected. Honora died 14 months before the ball at Marlhurst in March, after a decline of 2 years that had been slow enough to prepare him and sudden enough at the end to undo the preparation entirely. The morning after the ball, Esmeralda sat at her cousin's writing desk in the guest room at Marlhurst and composed her refusal of the dinner invitation she knew Tristan would send. She wrote it in 3 sentences, in her clearest hand, and sealed it before she had her tea. The refusal arrived at Mereworth House by noon. Tristan had not yet written the letter. What neither Tristan nor Esmeralda knew, what no one in that county knew, was that his sister Rosamond had been writing to Esmeralda for 3 years. Not about Tristan, not at first. About books, about the translations, about a question Rosamond had about a Kalana poem she had read and could not fully understand. Esmeralda had answered, and then Rosamond had answered her answer, and over 3 years of quiet correspondence they had become, carefully and without announcement, something approaching friends. Rosamond had never mentioned the letters to her brother. Esmeralda had never mentioned them to anyone. But on the morning after the ball, reading Esmeralda's 3-sentence refusal of a dinner that had not yet been offered, Rosamond sat with the letter for a long time, and then set it aside without forwarding it. Because she had been watching for 3 years, and she understood something that neither Tristan nor Esmeralda was yet willing to admit. 6 weeks after the ball, Esmeralda attended the Christmas assembly at Marlhurst. She did not avoid it. The decision not to avoid it was itself a decision, and she made it clearly, without pretending to herself that it was simply a matter of proximity or social obligation. She dressed in green this time. She arrived with her cousin and her cousin's husband, and she danced the first 2 sets, and she did not look for him. Tristan came with Rosamond. He did not approach Esmeralda all evening. He danced with his sister once and stood near the fire for the rest of the night. And when Esmeralda moved through the room, she was aware of where he was, with the particular awareness one develops for objects that have the potential to cause damage. Not fear exactly, but attention. At the close of the evening, on the staircase, she dropped her glove. It fell from her wrist at the second step from the bottom, and she heard it land, and she did not need to turn to know that he was behind her. She turned anyway. He had already bent to retrieve it. He straightened and held it out, his hand at the cuff, the pearl buttons toward him. And she reached for it, taking the fingers of the glove in her own fingers, and for 3 seconds they both held it. Their skin did not touch. The kid skin of the glove was between them, and the distance was 3 inches and 3 seconds and 12 years. And then she said, "Thank you," and continued down the stairs without looking back at him. He did not watch her go. He had promised himself he would not, and he kept the promise, and he stood at the top of the staircase, holding the shape of the glove's warmth until Rosamond appeared at his elbow and said quietly that the carriage was ready. Both of them understood, driving home in separate carriages through the December cold, that the county was too small for permanent avoidance, and that avoidance, in any case, was not quite what either of them was practicing anymore. Rosamond proposed the correspondence in January. She wrote to Esmeralda directly, "My brother wishes to write to you. I have told him I will ask whether you are willing to receive letters. I have told him nothing else." Esmeralda read the letter twice, then wrote back, "I will receive them. I will not answer them directly. If I have anything to say in return, I will say it through you." Rosamond relayed the terms. He agreed without argument. He wrote on Tuesdays. The letters were not declarations. She had braced herself for declarations, for the elaborate epistolary apology of a man who had spent 12 years composing it in his head. And she found instead that he wrote about his daughters. Beatrix had asked at breakfast whether stars moved or whether the earth moved, and the stars only appeared to. And Tristan had not known the answer. And they had spent the evening with a celestial atlas, trying to work it out together. Cecily had made a drawing of the orangery in February light that was, he wrote, better than anything he could have done at 8. And he was not saying this because she was his daughter. He was saying it because the perspective was genuinely unusual, and he did not know where she had learned it. He wrote about what he was reading. He had been working through a translation of Dante. Not Esmeralda's translation, he noted carefully, but an older one. And he had a question about a particular passage in the Purgatorio, if she was ever disposed to answer it. She read every letter. She answered none of them directly, but she found, on the Tuesday afternoons when the letter had not yet arrived, that she checked the hall table more than once. Lady Millicent Caulfield's letter came on a Wednesday in the 3rd week of February. Millicent was Honora's elder sister, 52, precise, a woman whose grief had taken the form of vigilance rather than dissolution. She did not write in anger. That was the first thing Esmeralda noticed. reading it at her desk in Bath with the fire burning and the window showing the gray February street outside. "I do not write to accuse you," Millicent had written. "I write as a woman who watched her sister spend 11 years making her husband into the man who now presents himself to you." Honora was not a dramatic woman. She did not speak of her marriage to me in terms of sacrifice. But I was her sister, and I watched. And I know what it cost her to build a household from a man who was still in love with someone else when he married her. I ask only this: that when you consider what is being offered to you, you understand at what price it was purchased, and by whom, and that she is no longer here to speak for herself. Esmeralda read it 3 times. She did not reply. She folded it carefully and placed it in the inner compartment of her writing case, where she kept the things she was not yet finished thinking about. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday afternoon, she stood at her Bath window with Millicent's letter in her left hand and Tristan's latest letter, still sealed, in her right. She stood there for a while. Then she opened his. The library at Mereworth was a room she remembered. She had been in it twice, at 23 and 24, in the early months of the engagement, when the house had seemed to her full of a future she was already beginning to arrange in her mind. The arrangement had come to nothing. The library had not changed much. The same walls of brown and gilt, the same smell of old leather and coal smoke, the same desk at the far end that had always seemed slightly too large for the room. She arrived in a hired carriage, which was itself a statement. Tristan was standing when she entered. He had been standing for some time, she thought, by the look of him. "I will not have tea," she said, before he could offer it, "and I will remain standing. You may sit if you wish." He did not sit. "Esmeralda," he began, "I owe you an apology that I have been composing for 12 years, and I am aware that 12 years of composition has made it worse rather than better. But I want to—" "I did not come for an apology," she said. He stopped. "I did not say I would not listen to one eventually," she continued. "But I did not come for that today. And if you begin there, we will spend the 10 minutes I have allotted you on the apology and nothing else, and that seems to me a waste of both our time. So, tell me what you want, precisely." Tristan looked at her. He looked at her the way she had seen him look at the celestial atlas, she imagined, with the expression of a man who understood he was in the presence of something that required more precision than he currently possessed. He was quiet for 12 seconds. She counted them. "I want to court you," he said. "Not to reclaim you. I understand the distinction. I want to court you, to begin from where we actually are, which is 2 strangers who once knew each other, and to proceed from there, if you are willing to let me proceed at all." "And how?" she asked. "Do you intend to earn the standing to do that?" Another silence. Shorter this time, but more uncomfortable. "Or, I don't know," he said. "I don't have an answer to that. You would have to tell me." She studied him. The honesty of the admission, not performed, not strategic, simply the blunt acknowledgement of a man who had run out of strategies, was, she found, au fait du vibes, more unsettling than any prepared speech would have been. She had been prepared for cleverness. She had not prepared for this. She rose. She extended her hand, not to shake, but to indicate formally that the audience was concluded. He took her fingers briefly, bowed over them without kissing them, and released her hand before she withdrew it. The most formal touch possible between 2 people who had once been engaged to be married. And its formality was precisely what made the air in the room change when it ended. "Good afternoon, Tristan," she said, and she left. In the hired carriage back to Bath, with the frost forming on the window and the Mereworth gates receding behind her, she allowed herself, for the first time, to think that he might have actually changed. She did not allow the thought to become a decision, but she did not stop the thought either. 1 week later, Rosamond's letter arrived. It was brief. "There is something you should know," Rosamond wrote. "Honora knew about the letter my brother wrote to you at 28. He told her himself, the night before their wedding. She married him anyway. And in her last week, she was lucid until very near the end. She told me that she had spent her marriage being grateful to you for refusing to read it. She said, 'The woman who burned that letter gave me a husband who knew what he had done. I do not think she would have wanted me to keep this from you.' Esmeralda sat with the letter for 3 days. She did not write to Rosamond. She did not write to anyone. She sat with it, and she let her understanding of 12 years reorganize itself around this new information. And she found that her feelings did not simplify. Her anger did not dissolve. It became instead more precise, a scalpel where there had been a blunt instrument, which was in some ways worse. She withdrew to Bath for 8 weeks after that. She returned Tristan's letters directly for the first time. Not through Rosamond, but in their original envelopes, with no note, simply returned. She understood this was a statement. She made it deliberately. She began, in those 8 weeks, a translation of a Vittoria Colonna sonnet about widowhood and returning. It was not the easiest of Colonna's poems. The syntax of the final tercet was compressed in a way that resisted English, and Esmeralda wrote 3 versions of the closing lines and abandoned all 3. The poem was about a woman returning to a place she had loved, and finding that neither the place nor the woman was what the memory had said they were. Esmeralda understood the poem entirely and could not finish it. In the 7th week, Lady Millicent Caulfield arrived at Mereworth unannounced. Tristan was in the library when she was shown in, and he rose when she entered, and he did not offer her tea because the look on her face was not the look of a woman who had come for tea. "You will not marry her within 2 years," Millicent said. She did not sit. "I am not asking this for myself. I am asking it for Beatrix, who still sleeps in her mother's shawl. My sister has been dead 14 months. Her elder daughter is 10 years old and has not stopped carrying that shawl. And you wish to bring a new woman into this house. I am asking you to wait. 2 years from Honora's death. That is what I am asking." Tristan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Yes." "Without conditions?" Millicent asked. "Without conditions," he said. He did not tell Esmeralda. He understood, without having to reason it through, that telling her would be a kind of leverage. "Look what I have sacrificed for you," and that she would recognize it as leverage, and it would cost him more than the silence would. At the end of the 8th week, Esmeralda wrote to Rosamond in her own handwriting. Not through an intermediary, not with a formal salutation, simply, "I would like to see your brother, in the orangery, alone, 1 hour, February, if that can be arranged." Rosamond arranged it. The orangery at Mereworth faced south, and in February it held a warmth that had no business existing in an English winter. The smell of ripening citrus, the sound of water in the irrigation pipes, the particular quality of light through glass on a gray morning that made everything inside look slightly more alive than it was. Tristan was early. He sat on the iron bench for 10 minutes before he heard the carriage on the gravel, and then he stood and remained standing. Esmeralda came in without a greeting. She looked at the bench and did not take it. "Tristan," she said. I am going to say what I came to say. You will not interrupt. When I have finished, I will ask you one question. Then I will leave. If your answer is yes, you may write to me. Is that acceptable? Yes, he said. She turned to face the glass. The frost-pale garden beyond it, the bare February trees. I have spent 12 years becoming a woman who does not require you, she said. I did not set out to. I set out to survive. The surviving became a life. I published 3 volumes under my own name. I run a salon that 17 people attend every Thursday, and that 3 of them have told me is the best conversation available in the west of England. I speak Italian well enough to argue with a Florentine about his own poets. I have a household that runs because I run it, and a reputation that exists because I built it. And I would like you to understand that I am not telling you this to impress you. I am telling you so that you understand what you are looking at when you look at me. She was quiet for a moment, and then she turned. When I saw you at the ball in October, I understood that you are grieving. I understand grief. I have had my own. But some part of your grief has rearranged itself into a desire to return to me. I want you to hear this clearly. That is not the same thing as loving me. I will not be the soft landing of a man whose wife has died. I will not be the thing you reach for because she is gone, and I am the shape that fits the space she left. She stopped. She looked at him steadily. Rosamond wrote to me about Honora, about what Honora knew and what she said in her last week. I have been sitting with that for 2 months. I do not hate you, Tristan. I am past the age when hate is efficient. What I am is finished. Finished with being the girl who loved you at 24. That woman is gone. I buried her a long time ago, quietly, without ceremony, because she needed burying and no one else was going to do it. The woman standing here is harder and older and will not forgive quickly. She is the one you have to speak to. Tristan waited to be certain she had finished. Then he said, "May I answer?" "Yes," he said. He looked at his hands for a moment, then at her. "I did not come to the ball looking for the girl," he said. Rosamond insisted, and Beatrix asked whether I would dance again, and I came because I had run out of reasons not to. And then I saw you across the room, and I said what I said because I have no cleverness left. You used to be beautiful. That was true, and it was stupid. And the moment it was out of my mouth, I knew exactly what it sounded like. You are more beautiful now, and I did not know how to say it. And so I said the wrong thing instead, because the wrong thing was the only thing I had. When you answered me, when you said I used to be kind, I understood that you were right. The kindness I had at 28 cost me nothing. It was the easy kind. I have been trying to learn the other kind on another woman's patience for 11 years, and I learned it. And I am sorry it took me that long. And I am sorry about the cost of the lesson. I do not want the girl, Esmeralda. I want the woman you became while I was not looking. He waited. She was looking at him, not with the glass expression she had worn at the ball, not with the careful formality of the library, but with something else, something she had not quite managed to hold to the shape she had intended. "What was your question?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment that was longer than she had planned. "The letter," she said, "the one I did not read. Do you still have it?" "Yes," he said. "Where?" "In the drawer of my writing table, in this house." "Would you give it to me now, if I asked?" "Yes." "Without reading it first yourself?" "I have never read it," he said. I wrote it at 28. I have been afraid to find out what that man said." She looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded once, a small, decisive movement. "Bring it to me," she said. "To Thornvale. Next Tuesday. Hand it to me in my own parlor. I will read it, or I will burn it in front of you. I have not decided which. You will not decide with me." "Yes," he said. "Goodbye, Tristan." She walked out through the orangery door into the February cold without her cloak. It remained folded on the bench where she had left it. He did not call after her. He did not follow. He sat down on the bench and he picked up the cloak and he held it in his lap for an hour, until Rosamond came to find him and said nothing at all, simply stood beside him in the warmth of the citrus-smelling glass room until he was ready to go in. Rosamond had the cloak wrapped and sent to Thornvale the next morning, with a note that said only, "My brother did not open the parcel." Esmeralda received it at 11, unwrapped it in her parlor, and stood holding it for a moment, the smell of oranges and February cold, and something else she could not name and did not try to. She folded it. She placed it in the cedar press. She did not wear it for 3 months, and when she finally wore it again in May, his scent was gone. And she stood for a moment with that absence, acknowledging it as the small, precise thing it was. The following Tuesday at Thornvale, Tristan arrived at 3 o'clock. He placed the letter on the parlor table without speaking, the seal intact, his own handwriting from 12 years ago, slightly younger in its formation than the hand he had now. He sat. He did not speak. Esmeralda lifted it. She rose. She crossed to the fire, which was burning well in the afternoon cold, and she held the letter toward the flame, close enough that the paper caught the heat without yet catching the light. And she looked at him over her shoulder. "If I burn this," she said, "I burn what the man you were thought he was promising. If I read it, I learn what he actually said. Which do you think I should do?" "I cannot tell you," he said. "Why not?" He met her eyes across the room. "Because the answer is yours. I spent 12 years believing I had the right to answer every important question in my own life. I was wrong about that." She considered. She turned from the fire. She did not burn it, and she did not read it. She crossed the room and placed the letter on the mantelpiece, behind the clock, where it stood upright between the clock's base and the wall. "It will stay there," she said. "I will decide later. Perhaps much later. You will not ask." "No," he said. She looked at him sitting in her parlor in the afternoon light, and something in her expression shifted. Not warmth yet, but the absence of the glass. "Sit down, Tristan," she said. "Ring for tea." He sat. She poured. She told him about a problem she had encountered in the Petrarch, a line in the canzoniere that had 3 defensible translations, and she could not determine which one the poet had intended. And it was making her want to argue with a man who had been dead for 450 years. Well, Tristan said that seemed like a reasonable response to Petrarch. He told her that Beatrix had decided the moon moved and the stars did not, and was prepared to defend this position against all comers, including her father. Esmeralda said that sounded like a child who would give someone a great deal of trouble in the best possible way. Tristan said yes. At 6 o'clock, she walked him to the door. She did not offer her hand. She did not refuse it. She watched his carriage pull away down the Thornvale drive, and then she went back inside and stood for a moment in the hallway, looking at nothing in particular, before she went upstairs to change for dinner. In April, on a Thursday, Tristan rode from Mereworth without sending word ahead. He found her on the orchard walk at 4 in the afternoon. She walked there every Thursday when the weather permitted, and he had learned this from Rosamond. and he had not asked himself too carefully what it meant that he had learned it. She saw him coming along the path between the apple trees, and she stopped and waited. He stopped 4 feet from her. "Esmeralda," he said, "I would like to ask permission for one thing. I would like to kiss you. Once. Now. I will leave directly after. I will not presume anything from your answer." She looked at him for a long moment, the bare branches above him, the April light, the way he was standing with his hands at his sides, like a man who had decided not to reach for anything he had not been offered. "Yes," she said. He crossed the 4 feet. He placed his palm flat against the side of her jaw, his thumb at the corner of her mouth, his fingers warm along the line of her throat. And he kissed her. Her mouth opened to his, fully and deliberately. The kiss of a woman who knew exactly what she was doing and had chosen it with her eyes open. She raised her hand and covered his where it lay against her jaw. She held it there. When they separated, she did not release his hand immediately. She brought it down, turned his palm toward her, and kissed the center of it, a slow, deliberate kiss that had nothing to do with 24 and everything to do with 36, given now, to this man, in this orchard, in this April light. She released him. "Ride back by dark," she said. He rode. She stood in the orchard for 35 minutes after his horse disappeared between the trees. She did not sit. She did not weep. She stood in the particular silence of a decision that has already been made, feeling the weight of it settle into her, like something she had been carrying for a long time, finally finding its proper place. At the 12th month, Esmeralda wrote to Rosamond requesting an audience at Mereworth with Lady Millicent Caulfield present. Rosamond arranged it without asking questions. The 2 women met in the Mereworth drawing room on a Tuesday afternoon in October, 1 year, almost to the day, after the ball. Millicent was already there when Esmeralda arrived. She rose when Esmeralda entered, and they looked at each other with the honesty of 2 women who have no reason to pretend. "I have read Rosamond's letter," Esmeralda said when they were seated. "The one about what Honora knew and what she said at the end. I want you to know that I understand what your sister built. I understand what it cost. I have not spent this year ignoring that cost. I have spent it trying to understand it clearly. I will wait the 2 years you asked Tristan for. I want you to know that I agreed to this before I knew he had agreed to it. And I am not agreeing because of him. I am agreeing because it is right." Millicent was quiet for a moment. "He told you?" she said. "No," Esmeralda said. "Rosamond did. He didn't tell me. I think he was afraid it would look like a bargaining chip." Something shifted in Millicent's expression at that. A small movement, barely visible. "I have one question," Esmeralda said. "When Beatrix is older, when she is old enough to ask about her mother in the way that children eventually ask, what do you wish me to say to her? Not about Honora and Tristan, about Honora herself. What you would want a woman who never knew her to tell her daughter." Millicent looked at her for a long moment. Then, for the first time since her sister's death, she wept, briefly, quietly, with the particular grief of a woman who has been holding herself together by force of will and has finally been given permission to set it down for a moment. She answered Esmeralda's question. She answered it fully and specifically, and Esmeralda listened without interrupting and did not look away. When they parted, they did not embrace. They shook hands, formally, respectfully, with the acknowledgement of 2 women who had each done what the situation required, and who would not pretend the situation had made them friends. It had made them something more durable than friends. It had made them honest with each other. That would have to be enough. And it was. 14 months after the ball at Marlhurst, in May, Esmeralda Thornvale married Tristan Halverton, Duke of Mereworth, at the parish church of Thornvale. Wisteria covered the stone arch of the door. It had come in early that year. The whole county remarked on it. There were 15 guests. Esmeralda wore pale gray, not white, and carried nothing but a single sprig of rosemary from the Thornvale garden, because she had decided she was too old for a bouquet and she liked rosemary. The vows were ones she had written and he had agreed to, having read them once and said only, "Yes, that is exactly right." The vows said, "I accept today that the person standing beside me is not the person I once imagined, and I choose this one again daily, knowing that the choosing is the marriage and not merely its beginning." The wedding breakfast was at Thornvale. This had not been discussed. It had been understood, without a word said between them, that the life they were building would be built from her ground up, not from the ruins of a house she had never lived in. Beatrix and Cecily came to the breakfast in their good dresses, and Beatrix shook Esmeralda's hand with the gravity of a 10-year-old who has decided to take something seriously, and Cecily gave her a drawing of the Thornvale orchard in April light, with 2 figures visible between the trees. That was better than it had any right to be. Rosamond kissed Esmeralda's cheek and said nothing at all, which was exactly the right thing. That evening, past 11, when the guests had gone and the house was quiet, Esmeralda sent the servants to bed. She lit the candles in the Thornvale library herself, the room where she worked, where the translations lived, where the writing table stood with its drawer and its lock. Tristan found her there when he came downstairs. He had changed out of his coat. She had untied her hair. She crossed to him. She took both his hands and lifted them, studying them the way she studied a difficult line of Petrarch. One meaning at a time, looking for what was underneath the surface. "Tristan," she said, "tonight I want you here, in this room, among my books, with the letter in the drawer behind me and you in front of me. Tomorrow, we will decide everything else. Tonight, this is the room I want." He answered quietly, "Yes." She raised his hands to her mouth and kissed his knuckles, slowly, each one in turn, with the deliberateness of a woman who has stopped being in a hurry. His other hand found the small of her back and drew her in, and she went, not yielding, but choosing, which was entirely different. She went up on her toes and kissed his throat, the hollow below his jaw, and then his mouth. Longer this time than the orchard. Something new in it now. Not recognition, but arrival. "Lock the door," she said. He went. She heard the key turn. When he came back, she had put out 2 of the 3 candles. The third burned on the writing table, steady in the still air, casting its light across the room where her work lived and where she had decided, finally, to let him in. The following morning, with the single candle burned to nothing on the writing table, and the May light coming through the library windows, Esmeralda took the letter from behind the clock on the mantelpiece. She carried it to where Tristan was sitting and held it between them, the seal still intact, the 12-year-old handwriting slightly faded now in the morning light. "I have decided," she said. He waited. "I am not going to read it," she said. "And I am not going to burn it. We are going to put it in the drawer of my writing table, and we are going to lock it. And when we die, our children will find it, and they will decide what to do with it. Beatrix will probably read it. Cecily will probably want to draw it." Tristan looked at her for a moment. He nodded. "Yes," he said. She crossed to the writing table. She opened the drawer. She placed the letter inside, gently, without ceremony. and she closed the drawer and turned the small brass key. She slipped the ribbon from around the key's bow and looped it around her own neck, where it settled against her collarbone, the key resting at the hollow of her throat. Tristan watched her do it. He did not ask what she kept there. He had learned, over 14 months and 11 minutes at a window and a glove on a staircase, and an hour in an orangery holding a cloak, that some things she kept were hers to keep, and that this was not a diminishment, but the precise shape of the life they were going to build. The clock on the mantelpiece kept its time. Upstairs, where the children had slept in the rooms Esmeralda had readied for them, Mrs. Holcomb drew the door gently closed. Outside the library window, the orchard stood in May light, the apple trees in blossom, the path between them empty and unhurried and entirely theirs.